Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 8th in this webinar series from the American Evaluation Association's Research Technology and Development Topical Interest Group, which is a little bit of a mouthful. So we're here today to listen to a webinar presented by Stephanie Faulkner and supported by Andrew, who's skipped in my list a little bit, but I'm pretty sure he's still there. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves more formally, but this will be, I'm sure, a really interesting and exciting presentation, and then hopefully a good discussion on responsible research assessment, particularly considering DORA and the Leiden Manifesto. So just before I hand over, I'm just going to do one quick plug. And that is the American Evaluation Association's annual conference, which is set to be held on the 8th of November through to the Friday of that week. So there'll be a number of good presentations there across. If you're interested, I would recommend you go to www.evaluationconference.org and reserve your spot. With that, I am going to now stop sharing my screen. And Stephanie, would you like to take it away?
Actually, if I may, I'll jump in quickly, Gavin. It's Andrew Plume here. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'd like to welcome everyone once again to this webinar on responsible research assessment with Stephanie Faulkner. My name's Andrew Plume, and as a close colleague of Stephanie's, it's my honor to introduce her today. Close observers, well, we're kind of building a little double act, Stephanie and I. In the previous iteration of this webinar series, we delivered a slightly different topic together, talking about ICSR Lab. It's in the recordings that Gavin mentioned earlier, and you can go catch it there. But let me introduce Stephanie to you all. Stephanie has spent over 25 years in the information industry, involved in the development, launch, and support of lots and lots of different software as a service tools, and most recently, the development and support of Plum X metrics, CiteScore, and various other indicators and classifications in Elsevier products. In her current role, Stephanie is the Director of Product Management and Operations for the Research Metrics Group of Elsevier and is an advisory board member of the International Center for the Study of Research, or ICSR. We like a mouthful, and we also like a good acronym as well when it comes to naming our teams. And you can see the visuals on screen reflect the ICSR brand. So Stephanie works closely with academic institutions, with researchers, with funders, with not-for-profit organizations, with corporates, and with publishers to explore the development of new forms of metrics, indicators, and classifications that support research evaluation. If you would like to ask Stephanie a question today, which is your right and prerogative today, please enter your thoughts in the chat box at the bottom of your screen at any time. I'll be monitoring that so Stephanie can concentrate on what she's doing, but I'll be bringing those, I'll be your voice. I'll bring those questions back to Stephanie on your behalf a little later on once Stephanie has spoken to us on what she'd like us to hear today. So Stephanie, you're sharing your screen already. The floor is yours. Where you go.
Great, thank you, Andrew. I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. As Andrew mentioned, he'll kind of oversee the questions while we're going through. I'm going to leave plenty of time at the end too for questions and discussion. So, we should have plenty of time to be able to have a nice discussion around research assessment and research evaluation. Let me switch screens here. So as Andrew mentioned, right, I'm here representing the ICSR, the International Center for the Study of Research. And our mission is to work in the research evaluation and research assessment space to further the study of research and to contribute to an evidence base that supports the practice of research strategy, evaluation, and policy. We really want to make research more evidence-based, and you can see sort of how we're addressing that on the right-hand side of this slide. Today, I'm also going to talk a little bit about research assessment in the broader context of research evaluation. So you'll hear me kind of using both terms interchangeably. Research assessment is a big part of research evaluation as a whole. So what is research evaluation and what does it mean to you? research evaluation can be broadly defined as the systems and approaches in which any research stakeholder evaluates or assesses performance of any other research stakeholder, right? So that can include formal and informal evidence frameworks, methods and tools, narrative evidence on societal impact, evidence of influence, reputation, behaviors, many different types of things. And research evaluation can be used retrospectively to look at past performance, but it's increasingly being used at a forward-looking approach, looking at strategic objectives of resources for the future. So I want to make a clear distinction between research evaluation on the left of the slide and research metrics on the right of the slide, and focus kind of on that overlap or the Venn area between them, which is where we're going to have our topic today, the responsible use of research metrics in research evaluation. There's going to be times when research evaluation can be conducted without recourse to research metrics. And on the other side, not all research metrics are useful in a research evaluation context. So today's topic has really become much more important, I think, over the last 10 to 15 years. And why do we think that is? Well, allow me to use a musical analogy, and this is Andrew's brainchild, and I just loved it. So I want to talk about a drumbeat of change where the amplitude and the frequency is steadily rising and giving, to a louder, higher pitched tone. The increase in importance has been driven really broadly by increased competition for scarce resources, such as funding and faculty positions, increased accountability from funders and government policies, especially during the pandemic times. We also see a huge increase in the scrutiny of research infrastructure and culture and practices such as open science, not only from funders, but also by the public, and about how we know what we know about the world around us. So I want to draw this drumbeat out as a timeline moving from left to right. And you'll see some key events pop up here. I'm not going to talk about all of them in detail, but hopefully this gives you a sense of the activities over the past 10 plus years, and you can see how they've increased much more recently. Allow me to highlight a few key events. So the first key event is on the left in 2013, and that's DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, a very influential statement on research assessment. This statement's probably the most well-known, I think, in the US compared to some of the other similar types of documents, and we'll talk quite a bit about that today. And shortly after DORA came out in 2013, you'll see in 2015, the Leiden Manifesto, which came out of the Netherlands, followed a few months later by a report from the UK called the Metric Tide. And then most recently last year, and probably the least well-known, I think, is the Hong Kong Principles that came out in July of 2020. These four things I'm going to refer to today collectively as manifest statements. They're manifestos, they're statements, they're reports, but just to make it easier, I'm going to call them manifest statements for simplicity's sake. I also want to call out the establishment of the ICSR, which Andrew and I are a part of, and that was launched in 2019. And you'll see that in mid and late 2020, Elsevier, our parent organization, endorsed not only the Leiden Manifesto, but we are also now a signatory of DORA. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later in the presentation. I'm going to pop up a few other things now just to illustrate that Elsevier has actually been walking the walk when it comes to responsible use of metrics in research evaluation for over 10 years, right? It even predates DORA. And I'm hoping that this will, give you sort of an indication that, we've been doing a lot of things for quite some time. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the drivers that you're going to see at the bottom of the screen in more detail. And I hope that this really resonates with you today. So the drivers for all of these manifest statements and all of this change in research evaluation and assessment, the first driver really came out of the desire for better bibliometric indicators. And what do I mean when I say bibliometric indicators? I'm talking about publications and their citations that link to them. Counting publications for journals, but also for books and conference proceedings and so forth. And the citations or cited references that accrue to them from published work. And we're seeing a huge desire for improvement and an extension of these indicators to become smarter and more appropriate for their use. And closely related to the first driver and sort of near and dear to my heart is the desire for non-bibliometric indicators for a broader view of research. So these are indicators that go beyond citations, and they look at a broader view of research like societal impact, or how at the individual researcher level, we can understand, what contributions are made to that. And that all leads to driver number 3, an increasing focus by funders, governments, and the public regarding the societal and economic outcomes of research. So, what is research doing, or how is it impacting the society that we live in? Driver 4 is an increased focus on the institutional missions or the university missions and at their local prioritization and how they are delivering outcomes that impact their local community. So it's not, 3 is on a global scale, and 4 is really at a local level. How does research and research assessment make an impact? And driver 5 talks about open research and evaluation infrastructure. And we're going to touch upon that in just a second as well. But the open science agenda is really closely interlinked with this rise in research evaluation over the past 10 years. And finally, the last driver is about the drive to change research cultures globally. And there are many different global cultures and quite a need for change for the better, especially around inclusion and diversity and sustainability. Many organizations, including Elsevier, as well as researchers and institutions and funders around the world, are really focusing on things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how research supports those. So as I mentioned, it's hard to talk about research evaluation and assessment without mentioning open science. Since, point 5 on that 5th driver on the last slide says, as these topics become more and more intertwined. So I'm going to speak a bit briefly about it, but it's not the focus of our subject today. That could be a whole nother session on open science. So if you look at the diagram on the left, you're going to see open science as the roof of the building. And it's a broad term through which we understand a lot of initiatives that we see going on around the world. And all of them are really underpinned by open tools and software that are supporting, they're the base, they're supporting that broad base of initiatives around open access to publications. And I have to say, I think most people, when they hear the term open science, they think open access. But we also see an increase in open data, open metrics. And, as soon as we talk about those areas, then you get into topics such as the realm of in research evaluation and assessment with, research reproducibility, integrity, and, science and society. So it's all part of the broader open science discussion. And all of these discussions have really been intertwining, as I said, for the last decade or so. So to save you a little time, if you haven't read all 4 of these manifest statements, allow me to summarize the key and common themes that they're all driving for. So all 4 of those manifest statements or documents for DORA, the Leiden Manifesto, Metric Tide, and the Hong Kong Principles are easily available if you want to check them out and take time to read them yourselves. We put the links sort of at the bottom of that slide above the footer. The first common theme is that those who conduct research evaluation, or those folks who are responsible or support evaluation, and those who are the subject of the evaluation, should always use explicit, very clearly spelled out evaluation criteria and an array or a variety of metrics and indicators to support expert review. And expert review is always part of that mix. The second common issue in these 4 manifest statements is to recognize the limitations of our classic publication-based and citation-based metrics, and to really push to extend beyond non-publication outputs. And finally, the third common theme is to strive for the openness of data and the transparency in the calculation of metrics. And in the next couple of slides, I'll also share some examples of how that's being done. So each manifest statement has a specific emphasis, which you'll see on the slide, and I won't go into great detail, but each has also a slightly different window on the question, and it comes from a slightly different background. So let's move on to take a look at what these manifest statements not only say, but what they don't say, because it's quite ironic that most of these statements are really strongly anti-reductionist. They're very interested in not reducing research performance into one small number or of simple metrics. But unfortunately, these manifest statements themselves, especially DORA, come under fire and are often reduced to certain default positions that are they're anti-H index or anti-GIF. So it's important to note that not one of these manifest statements propose a ban on any use of existing research metrics, even those metrics that can be seen as controversial, like the GIF or the H index. They only call to end the inappropriate use of these indicators. Remember that, the inappropriate use. And none of these manifest statements call for a ban on the development of new metrics either, or research indicators. It's only that if new metrics are created, they're designed according to best practices and attempting at all, wherever possible, to avoid unintended consequences of those use of indicators. And finally, none of these manifest statements claim that the metrics themselves are responsible or not. They're just numbers, right? So they can't be responsible for the inappropriate use. The responsibility of the use of these metrics has to be from those who use them. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, how Elsevier has aligned with two of those manifest statements. It was on our drumbeat timeline, and what we've actually done to make changes based on these manifest statements. So this was a press release that we put out on our ICSR website in July of 2020, saying that Elsevier endorsed the Leiden Manifesto. And then in December 2020, we signed DORA. So both of these documents are explicit in their phrasing, both the Leiden Manifesto and DORA. But I will say that their meaning has been subject to change, right? So the meaning invested in some of these ideas behind these statements started to change as soon as they were published in 2013 and 2015. They are moving targets. And even though they are written documents and the documents themselves are unchanged since their original publication, I think our expectations of what it means to meet the principles of both of those two manifest statements has changed over time. So for any of us who have signed on to these documents, it's a journey, and we all strive for continuous improvement towards a better version of responsible research assessment. So I want to talk a little bit about what Elsevier has done over the past few years. As I said earlier, we've supported and encouraged the responsible use of metrics and responsible research evaluation and assessment. But I want to highlight some things we've changed recently, especially in light of these manifest statements that have come out. So for a long time, Elsevier's published this document called the Research Metrics Guidebook, and it's primarily in a product called SciVal, but the guidebook is actually free and available to anyone, regardless of whether you subscribe to SciVal or not. And it covers all of the metrics that are in SciVal and in Scopus and across the whole Elsevier ecosystem. There's many products that have other metrics. And within that guidebook, we actually devote a whole chapter where we suggest which metrics to use for whatever evaluation case you're presented with. And we even give sort of suggestions or ancillary or companion metrics that you could use or could be useful to examine alongside any given indicator. We're trying to reinforce that idea that you should never rely on just one metric. You should always have a mix of both qualitative and quantitative metrics and indicators for truly responsible research evaluation and assessment. And we've even made it more front and center, and you can see this little animation here. This is a screenshot or a video from SciVal, right? And you can see that there's a button that says metrics guidance up sort of the top right, right next to where the metrics are presented. And then when you hover over that, you get information about the metrics on the screen. When you change the screen and you go somewhere else in SciVal and there's different metrics displayed, you get updated guidance, right? So it's really kind of dynamic. It gives you the definitions and the explanations and the companion information based on what you're seeing on the screen. Some other things that we've done, and I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about journal-based metrics. And that's something that's constantly under scrutiny for inappropriate use to evaluate researchers. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we evaluate researchers on the other slide, the next slide. But here I'm going to talk about CiteScore, right? So if you're not familiar with CiteScore, that's Elsevier's journal-based citation indicator, and it's intended to provide, a range, provide the average rate of citations in a given journal over a given period of time. So CiteScore was first launched back in 2016, and one of the Leiden Manifesto principles is that you should scrutinize indicators regularly. That's Leiden Manifesto number 10. It's the last principle. And, we took that very seriously, and we took a lot of customer feedback and expert feedback. And, in 2020, just last year, we launched a new version of CiteScore. We improved that. And we did that. We made it very clear why we did that here. And to reinforce Leiden Manifesto number 4, it's about making data collection and analytical processes open and simple and easy to understand. We've also got a link to our methodology, right? So that's fully exposed and anyone can see it. And, by the way, the CiteScore information, these journal source pages, while they live in Scopus, the product, the journal source pages and the associated metrics are freely available. You don't have to have a subscription to Scopus to go see them. So looking further at this journal metric page, and these indicators, you'll see that recommendation number 5 from the Leiden Manifesto is about making the underlying data freely available for verification purposes without subscription. And we do that at the publication level. We make all of the transparency data freely visible and available. Recommendation number 8 is about avoiding misplaced concreteness or false precision. So we modified CiteScore to only be rounded to 1 decimal place to avoid that false precision. And then finally, recommendation 9 in the Leiden Manifesto is about recognizing systematic effects. So you'll see that CiteScore is presented as a suite or an array of indicators, right? It's not just one metric, alongside 2 other journal citation metrics, the SNP and the SJR Chicago Journal Ranking, if you're not familiar with that. Now, on this side, I want to switch gears a little bit and move away from journal metrics to talk about author metrics. So we're still in Scopus, and I'm showing you an author profile. And you'll see all of the metrics and indicators are based on an author's publications in the Scopus database, right? And you can see here, if I click through, again, referring to the Leiden Manifesto again, this number 4, about keeping data simple and transparent. We tell you exactly how we came about Jane Q. Citizen's author profile, right? It was generated based on publications in Scopus. And if Jane wanted to check the data and the analysis on her profile, she has that ability to do so because she can check whether we have all of the correct publications matched to her name, and she can also suggest changes and edits, which supports Leiden Manifesto recommendation number 5. Recommendation number 7 asks us to base the assessment of researchers on a qualitative judgment of their portfolio. So you can see we don't just display numbers, we're also displaying terms or words or these topics highlighting Jane's research expertise of her published output, right? And we map those into clusters or topics of expertise of different research areas. And we can always then understand what Jane's context is as a researcher in a qualitative way as well as a quantitative way. And that same misplaced concreteness that I talked about just a few seconds ago and false precision was, we mentioned with CiteScore is also here where you can dig into the numbers. You can see that we have on the left, 69 publications and almost 3,400 citations, and our H index is 24. But we also provide ways to visualize and understand Jane's story over time. So our publication timeline breakdown, and get information about what's behind those numbers. So you don't have to just trust that number, those numbers that you see on there, you get to see the underlying data. And lastly, we recognize the systemic effects, as we mentioned also with CiteScore, that a suite of indicators is always preferred. We recognize the rise of preprint servers and their importance in scholarly communication, especially during the pandemic, right? That's really come to the forefront. And there's been pros and cons of that. And we're now aggregating preprints in Scopus from the most popular preprint archives, such as archive or preprint servers, including medRxiv, Archive, bioRxiv, chemRxiv, and SSRN. So including these preprints in an author profile kind of gives you a sense of what Jane's currently working on based on the early versions, manuscript versions that she's posting on these preprint servers. And so before I end, I really want to make sure everyone is aware that Elsevier also makes many of its metrics and indicators freely available for scholarly research through our ICSR Lab. And that was actually the topic that Andrew talked about last month. So if you're not familiar with the ICSR Lab, please check out his presentation. The recording should be available on the AEA website. You know, in addition to metrics such as Scopus, you will find PlumX metrics, right? Those alternative metrics. And you'll find indicators about author gender, you'll find SciVal topics of prominence and more. And we make this really powerful computational platform freely available to researchers. All you have to do is submit a research proposal. And if you're approved, you get access and a wealth of data that you can use for your research papers and dissertations or theses. So I want to open the floor up now, and I thank you for your time. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about research assessment and evaluation, and I'll take any questions. Andrew and I'll field any questions you may have.
Excellent, thank you, Stephanie. So I'm looking in the chat, and I have not yet seen any typed questions in the chat from anyone present today. So let's throw it open. We've got a little time. If you wanted to go ahead and unmute and just ask your question verbally, if it's easier to do that rather than a lot of typing, please go ahead. We'd be very happy to have you speak up. So if anyone wanted to unmute and ask a question, make a comment, please feel free to do that now.
I'm going to take advantage of the quiet and ask just a technical question, but also just a question of sort of interest to me. So at a very sort of focused, talking about CiteScore, I'm just wondering how easy is it to go under the hood if you're looking at essentially a figure that relates to a person or an article. And obviously there's several different providers of similar sorts of metrics, and there are all sorts of good reasons as to why they may differ. But as a person, how easy is it for me to be able to look and make that sort of assessment of coverage, probably?
Stephanie, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, Gavin, you raise a really interesting point, right? Depending on where you look, you're going to see different data sets, right? So I could have an H index that's very different in Google Scholar than it is from Scopus. So again, from a Scopus or an Elsevier standpoint, to see the underlying data to a Scopus profile, you do have to have a registered account that's connected to that profile so that we know it's you. To be able to make changes, anyone can see the profile within Scopus. But we do go through a validation process to make sure you're the owner of that before you submit any changes or request any edits to that. So yeah, I mean, and listen, there are different products that are used around showcasing researchers and research evaluation, where maybe they don't display their full publication information, they curate what they want to show, and they may compute metrics or in like an H index again around only what's visible, right? So it is hard. You have to do a lot of detective work, I think, to really to see everything on all the different platforms, and that it's confusing, right? So you pick what metrics tell a story you want to tell, and again, making that data transparent and available, I think, is critical. And if you can't just take a H index of 24 on a Google Scholar profile as Word. You really need to be able to see why that is. So
I think, Gavin, if I may jump on top of your point there, Stephanie, Gavin, it also relates to transparency in what is the universe that we're analyzing here. It's not even the calculation and computation of those publications and matching them to an individual person, but what was the universe that we looked at to even gather that up? And this is where you get the importance of curation policies on databases. So Google Scholar is, as we know, scraping the web, but how it does that and how it aggregates that data is a black box. Scopus has selection policies, journal selection policies, and data processing policies, which are available on the website. So I want to recognize other commercial solutions. This is not a product advertisement for Scopus, but just saying that is a critical piece of the puzzle when we're talking about these research metrics and talking about how we make a responsible use of those is also a responsible use of or understanding of how they come to be to begin with. I think, I wonder, Stephanie, on that point, I think, Gavin, maybe your point was also related to the CiteScore, I think you mentioned it as well. And Stephanie, did you want to talk to the transparency in the source of the numerator and denominator of that average as well?
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, those journal source pages that are part of Scopus.com are all freely available, and the metrics on them are all freely available. And there are links on the source pages. You can link to the numerator, the articles that make the numerator and the articles that make the denominator. You can see those. We also have something called a CiteScore tracker, and that's a monthly indicator that shows progress being made towards the next year's CiteScore, since it's calculated on an annual basis. And we make that information publicly available, so it's all there. I mean, you can't go, searching in Scopus once you're in there. You do see the list of the articles, but we do make it all available. We do make it all visible. It's all free. And you can even download, I think if you're a Scopus.com subscriber, you can download that information as well in a spreadsheet form, but it's all there.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have a question from Sonia. Thanks, Sonia, for asking. How can we find out more about the ICSR Lab, please? Perhaps even, Stephanie, you wanted to just reverse a couple slides back to that as you speak to that point.
Sure. So if you go to ICSR.net, that is the ICSR website, you will find on that main page, there should be a link to ICSR Lab, and it will give you, it'll take you to a page. It'll give you a list of all the sources so you can see all the data sets we currently have. And we're always adding more. We're always looking for new ones to add where it makes sense. And it will talk a little bit about the application process, right? There's some terms and conditions you have to agree to and things like that. And it talks about that. So ICSR.net down on the bottom right side. You'll see ICSR Lab right there on the main page. Just click through and then you can read more about that and apply.
And I've just put a bunch of links into the chat so that you have those to your fingertips if you're more interested to learn more that way, Sonia. Elise,
one quick thing I want to say about the lab, though, Andrew, before we move on.
Please go ahead,
Just so you know, while it is data sets that Elsevier provides, right, Scopus and Plum Metrics, you can bring your own data into the lab to work to integrate with Elsevier data, right? So it's not just limited to that. If you have other data you collected from outside, you are able to bring that in and perform your analysis side by side.
Thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie, you're going to love this question from Elise. She's asking, is it possible to share some more information about alternative metrics and the information available in PlumX? My organization, and I think this is reflecting a lot of organizations that we talk to, is interested in expanding our focus beyond bibliometrics, but are less familiar with alternative metrics. Could you speak to that point, please, Stephanie?
Yeah, sure. PlumAnalytics.com is the website where you can go and you can see the sources of metrics that we have for each of our 5 categories. We don't create a single score. We don't weight any sources more important than the others, but you can see each source for each of our 5 categories of metrics. And I'll say this, when I joined Plum like 6 years ago, right, alternative metrics were still fairly new and they were kind of suspect, and they're not as established as bibliometric, indicators and things like that. But metrics themselves have been around for almost 12 years, I think it is now. And it feels like we're becoming much more mainstream, and that people do need different ways, especially for researchers who are publishing, that aren't publishing journal articles. They're publishing books and book chapters, or they're doing a lot of conference papers, right? So and the social sciences, right? There's lots of different needs to be able to show the impact of someone's work. And in countries, not so much in the US, but in other countries where they have these big national assessments, like in the UK with the REF, or in Australia with the ERA, research, there's a lot of pressure put on researchers to be able to demonstrate impact in different ways, right? Again, so citation counts don't necessarily matter, but maybe how many times someone is reading or downloading my book chapter that's in an institutional repository, that could be a big deal. Or are there things such as policy citations or patent citations, where my work's been cited in a policy document by the UN or the WHO or, the government of France. Those are great demonstrators, policy and patent, and even clinical citations. Those are really important indicators of societal impact, right? So again, talking about that when we talked about that in the presentation earlier. How does my work make a difference in the real world, right? It's great that someone's citing me in another paper or another book chapter, but am I making a difference? Is my work, does it matter, right? So I think that's a great thing that altmetrics is kind of shining a light on. There are other ways to measure alongside traditional citations, not saying they're bad, you just put other things alongside of that to really get a comprehensive view. And again, speaking to those principles, having more than one metric, more than one way to look at a piece of research. And I'll say this, just don't even just only focus on numbers. You've got to have that, that quantitative bit about that. You're going to know more about your research and how it's being perceived and the impact it has. You have to put that narrative around the metrics. The numbers only tell part of the story. So the narrative is really just as critical. And I think altmetrics kind of brings a lot of that together. It gives you lots of different ways to see who's talking about your paper in the news or blogging, or is it mentioned in Wikipedia? Or, are people bookmarking it to their Mendeley reference manager library? I mean, there's been research that, bibliometric research that shows that if someone saves an article from Mendeley to their reference manager, they will more likely come back and cite that in the future when they're doing their own research. So like, we get Twitter things really quickly when something comes out. A Mendeley reader indicator is a great early indicator and a predictor of future citations. So there's lots of things you can get as soon as something is published on the web. You start to see tweets or Mendeley readers. For early career researchers, that's huge. Citations happen much more quickly than they used to, say 5 years ago, but they still take time. And so having these other early indicators, like I said, especially for early career researchers, gives them a way to demonstrate their value, their worth, their contribution to science and society. So
Stephanie,
I've got my soapbox now about Plumex metrics.
Gavin, I see your hand up. Go ahead, Gavin.
Sorry, I was just going to say, in a similar vein, there are other things available. So I did mention altmetric in the chat, but also, if I had my my day job hat on, so declaring an interest that I'm the chief analyst for Research Fish, so into Folio, and that's again, it's another way of trying to get a broader range of things beyond bibliometrics, starting to look at some of these other social and economic impacts more directly. And again, I think this all speaks to the responsible evaluation in trying to get these broad sweeps of things to give a bit of information here, a bit of information there, and build up a more complete picture.
Absolutely. You'll even see in certain Elsevier products, you'll see Plumex and altmetrics side by side in products, right? And I take no issue with that. We have some sources that are the same, some sources that are different. We track different identifiers for different things. So again, look at them all and take the things that are meaningful to you to help tell the story or the narrative around your piece of research. Macy's versus Gimbel's, Miracle on 34th Street, right? If Macy's doesn't have it, we'll send you to Gimbel's, right? So I mean, that's a US analogy, sorry.
I've got one here from DS. Thanks, DS, for joining us today. It's a really simple question, Stephanie, and it could be a very short answer, but how much does it cost to use the ICSR Lab?
Free.
Nothing.
Zero. Nothing
Nothing
but your time. Just, that's it. Seriously, no joke, free.
Yeah, to expand on that. So you can see on the slide that Stephanie's sharing here, it says bottom left, no cost. And we really mean that. Well, there are costs, but they're borne on our side, not yours. So the cloud computing environment, the data management, snapshot management, archiving, warehousing, all sorted. All you need to bring is a great research idea that you are committed to driving all the way down to a conference presentation, a publication, some kind of public exposure of the great idea that you've had in the interesting new arena that you're pursuing, and just at least a little bit of coding skill, because it is a computational platform. It's not quite as easy as Excel. It would require a little bit of coding skill. If you don't have it yourself, grab someone by the hand who's got some coding skills and bring them on with you, because we welcome teams. They don't have to be individual efforts. We welcome small teams who want to come in and work together on the lab as well. So I hope that answers your question, DS. Good. Will R, absolutely. SQL, absolutely. Ideally, if you've got a little Python, we are in business because it's based out of a third-party platform called Databricks, which operates a PySpark environment, if you're familiar with these terms. And so Python is native in there. It's going to work best for you. It's going to give you the most flexibility and power in the system. So let's go with, Karen, I didn't miss your question. It was on my list of things to pull up. Karen says, it's great, the preprints are in there. You mentioned, and you showed on screen there, Stephanie, that preprints are now there in the author profile as a supplementary view on the peer-reviewed publication aspect. But I think that the question then moves on to a slightly different territory. Have we plans to increase the non-English language content of Scopus? Where are we currently? Is there a roadmap? Is there anything that we are aware of that we can share today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I am not on the Scopus product team, so I cannot truly speak to their roadmap. I do, I know it's been discussed. I know it's been talked about. We have a lot of journals from countries such as China and Russia, but they are all in English. And right now, that is what Scopus is. It is all English language. So I can't speak with any clarity or certainty that will change.
Stephanie and Andrew, this is Holly. Can I step in for just a second?
Yeah, hi, Holly.
Hi, it's Holly Falk-Krasinski, also at Elsevier and part of ICSR, along with Stephanie and Andrew. Actually, we have a considerable amount of non-English language journal coverage. However, the requirement is that all of the articles in the journals have to have an English language abstract in order to be indexed in Scopus. And actually, I see from 2019, there was a preprint that I'm aware of that investigated actually non-English language coverage of both Scopus and Web of Science. I'll look to see if I can quick find the URL. But then I also want to point everybody in terms of, in addition to our main content selection board, actually Elsevier has a number of local regional content selection boards, and I will post a link to that URL that you can learn more about how we go about ensuring that we have coverage of non-English language journals into the Scopus database as well.
Brilliant, Holly. Thanks for chiming in. I appreciate that.
Superb. So I'm looking down the chat line there, and I am not seeing any other fresh questions appearing unless, no, it's, by the way, you'll see plenty of links in there that Holly's sharing with it. Thank you, Holly, for jumping in. You're quicker with the web links than any of us. Thanks for jumping in on that. So were there any other questions for Stephanie on the topic today?
Can give you
I'm hearing nothing. I'm seeing
back of your day, right? So.
I think we've just got one from, I know you're going to like this, Stephanie, from Karen. Once again, hi Karen again, at University of Reading here in the UK. Has the metrics guidebook been updated recently? What's the freshness on that document as it stands today?
It has not been updated this year. We will take a look at it. I believe, I don't know, Andrew, do you recall, was it last year that was updated? I mean, we do try to update it regularly. Yeah. In all honesty, there aren't a lot of things that change. We aren't adding, boatloads of new metrics because we may not need them. We may find new use cases or other evaluative or ancillary reasons, to add things. But I do think it gets updated fairly frequently. Yeah. It is, as I said, it's a PDF that you can download. And it's freely available.
Hi, Stephanie. Yeah. Sorry, it's Peter
Peter
Darroch here. Yes, sorry, I'm on the call. So yes, I can maybe.
When was it last updated? Yeah.
So it was updated fully a year or two ago, but actually on an ongoing basis, we have had some feedback coming in, and I've been updating certain sections of it on an ongoing basis. So I've released, I think, 3 updates in the past couple of months, and I've got another update in plan, and it's just little inefficiencies or misunderstandings, and we present certain equations and things, but the full update hasn't happened for some time, and it is something we should do. But And attached to that, we're actually incorporating the whole metric guidebook into actually the SciVal interface itself. So you're actually getting the metric guidebook at the point of use in the interface, so that you have a much more better way of understanding the metrics rather than having to go to a flat PDF. So
yeah, Peter, I actually showed that, right? How it's in SciVal,
cool.
and that does get updated, right? That's more,
Yeah.
that's more dynamic than the PDF. So yeah.
But it's good to flag. So thank you.
Thanks, Peter, for jumping in, our colleague, Peter Darrick, everyone. So you didn't just get one speaker representing Elsevier and ICSR today, you got in the end 4. So I hope you all feel you got your money's worth from today's webinar. You're very welcome. Gavin, perhaps if questions are drying up, shall we pass back to you?
Brilliant. Yes, thank you very much, Andrew, for being an excellent compere. And thank you very much, Stephanie, for the excellent talk. I really enjoyed both this and the previous one. And as you said earlier, the one that was focused on the center, which obviously people are interested in from this talk, you can go and see that earlier topic on YouTube, and I've put the link in the chat as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in this webinar. It's really nice and engaged to see everybody here today. And as I said at the beginning, if you're interested in joining the full American Evaluation Association conference at www.evaluationconference.org, it's a very good URL. You can go there and find out more about that in November. But with that, I think we'll close it for today. And thank you very much again for your time and effort.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.